This summer, I had my third hiccup of Crohn's. All the way up until that point, I was very comfortable. The Humira was handling all the inflammation and the symptoms. Up until August 7th, I felt completely fine. Humira seemed to be doing its job. And then that evening, the 7th, which was a Sunday, I felt a little discomfort when I was eating. That discomfort was very similar to the discomfort I felt when I was eating in the fall before my last hiccup. So I knew something was up, and we decided to have an appointment made with my doctor the following Monday, so the next day. That Monday, I went into the city where my doctor was, and we decided to just take a look and see what was going on. And after drawing some blood, we realized, hey, it's a serious issue. We don't really want to deal with this and let it escalate, so we ended up going to the ER. In the ER, we got a sonogram that showed inflammation over a 2-foot section of my small intestine, as well as a few pockets of inflammation that we would have to deal with. We decided to bring on a surgeon in case the steroids that I was being given through IV wouldn't be able to do their job and reduce the inflammation. And in the next 24 to 36 hours, we realized that yes, we would need that surgeon, and that surgery was going to need to happen. The surgeon decided that what was necessary was a removal of the inflamed section of bowel, as well as a resection of the areas that seemed to be little pockets of inflammation. If you can imagine the intestine as a hose, all that was happening really was one section was blocked off with inflammation, so the surgeon was going to cut at each end of where the inflammation was and remove that section and fit those two ends back together and stitch them together. Now, the other sections, those little pockets of inflammation that weren't significant enough to warrant a removal of them, what he did was a resection. After understanding completely the surgery by reading a book and looking online and having the surgeon explain in great detail what was going to happen, we decided that that was necessary. We ended up going ahead with the surgery. After we agreed that the surgery was necessary, we had a few conversations that kind of spooked me, and I want to share that with you. So the first conversation was when a nurse came in and sketched 2 circles on my lower abdomen, and it was described to me that those were markings in case a colostomy bag was going to be put in place. And my surgeon explained that those colostomy bag spots would only be for a temporary colostomy bag. There was a 10% chance that I'd need a colostomy bag, and although that bag was going to be temporary, it still really scared me that 10% chance that I was going to have a small bag hanging off my abdomen that was going to act as my lower intestine for a period of time. If every time you got into a car, you had a 10% chance that you were going to get into an accident, would you really want to get into that car? And that was the thought that went through my mind when I was figuring out how to internalize the idea of having a surgery and modifying my life because of it. Another number that scared me was the 2% chance on average that there's leakage. And what I mean by leakage is when you connect those 2 sections of bowel, that connection isn't perfect and doesn't heal up properly, and that intestinal fluid leaks into your stomach cavity, and then that would require a second surgery to fix that. The last thing that really scared me was a lifestyle change, and that was going to have the most impact on me, more than the 10% chance of having a temporary colostomy bag, more than the 1 to 2% chance that I was going to have a leakage and have to rehab the surgery to reconnect everything properly, was the fact that it was going to be a long time before I could do any kind of lifting again. And lifting was such a large portion of my life that really put into question whether I wanted to have the surgery or not. It's kind of funny that thinking about not being able to do lifting and do my rock climbing that I really enjoy was going to determine whether or not I was going to have a surgery that would basically save me from withering away from not being able to have food put into my system. And that just shows you how passionate I was about what I was doing on a day-to-day basis, my lifting, my climbing, and the abdominal wall was going to be cut in order to access my intestines. Any kind of activities that would cause me to build up a pressure in my abdomen against my abdominal wall where the incision was, give an opportunity potentially for a herniation of the incision. From deciding to have the surgery to actually having the surgery was only a window of about 48 hours. The surgery itself took about 4 hours. I was under anesthesia for about 5 hours because there's a prep period and a period where they have to make sure everything is good to go and there's no bleeding or anything like that. To give you guys a sense of how inflamed the piece of bowel was that got removed, I'm going to show you guys a picture and a side by side. So here is a picture of the intestine that was removed. It's very purple and irregular in shape, and here's a regular piece of intestine. Now, as you can see, this one looks very inflamed and it just looks unhealthy, whereas this one has a very regular coloration as well as it's more smooth overall. What my surgeon said was that he could actually see the pills that I had been taking that were supposed to be dealing with the inflammation. He could actually see full pills, undigested, trapped in the inflammation, in the pockets of constriction that were in the intestine that he removed. There were 2 incisions that were made that allowed this surgery to be successful. The first was the main incision, which was about 3 inches long, placed right on my belly button. And that allowed the intestines to be removed, to be inspected inch by inch, and find and remove the sections that were inflamed. The second incision was a smaller one, about 3/4 of an inch long, where a drain was put in place. That drain allowed for the natural body's healing fluids to be removed. The drain that was put in place is basically a turkey baster bulb to provide a little bit of a vacuum, and then a tube that extends from outside the body in through the smaller incision over to the surgical site, and the vacuum from the bulb pulled out the fluids that were generated from the healing process. After the surgery, I decided I would go ahead and document the healing process of both the incision as well as my recovery. So I have a few pictures to share with you guys. These pictures are a little bit gross because they are of my abdomen with some incisions. So you can skip ahead to a later part of the video, but I'd like to share these with you. The first picture is pretty soon after the surgery. It was in the following 24 hours. The next picture is the Monday following the Thursday surgery. So I had entered the hospital on a Monday, I had surgery on a Thursday, and then that following Monday, so 1 week after I entered the hospital, I actually was able to leave. So this picture is that Monday. As you can see, I'm hunched over. The wound healing caused there to be a bit of tension on my stomach, as well as the 7 staples that were put in place. So I wasn't really able to stand up straight, and as a result, my back was very uncomfortable for long periods of standing or walking around, so I ended up doing a lot of laying around. The next picture is a bit of a physical update. I decided to take a picture next to the wall where I actually have a picture of me at 160 pounds back in May of 2016 after about 4 months of lifting. And then I have a picture of now, following the surgery, of my physique. And yes, I'm still hunched over, but as each day passed, I was able to stand up more and more. After a week and a half of being out of the hospital, I got my staples removed. Those 7 staples were a bit of a painful process to have removed. It's been 3 weeks since my surgery, and here's a close-up of the wounds. In the middle you see the healed wound from the main incision, and then on the side you can see the small incision for the drain. As you can see, they've healed up basically as you would see any other cut or scrape. So like I said before, my surgeon told me that I wouldn't be able to do any weightlifting of any significant degree for what initially started as 1 to 3 months, and then once I kind of weaseled it out of him, it ended up being about 6 months before I could do the serious powerlifting I was doing before. Crohn's has taught me 3 major things. The first is resiliency. The second is perseverance. And the third is knowing myself to a greater extent than I could have ever known myself before. Thank you guys for watching. I know that watching a long video about somebody else's story might be frustrating, might be not very interesting, but it's definitely helpful to know more about the disease you have than to just go in hoping that the doctors know what they're talking about. Because yes, they do know what they're talking about, but you know yourself more than anybody else knows you to a degree. So it's important to really have as much information as you can to make the decisions that will best suit your situation. I want to close with what has been a little bit of a motto every time I get asked, oh, you have Crohn's, like how are you feeling, how has it affected you, what have you, and I like to respond with, yeah, I have Crohn's, but I'm not Crohn's. Like, I have a disease, but I don't allow that disease to embody who I am. Like, I don't embody the disease. At any given point, I might be sick, I might not feel well, I might not be in a great mental spot, but what I do is I realize, yes, I have Crohn's, but I am not Crohn's.